Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, along with full-time co-host Aaron Delp and monthly co-host Brandon Whichard. Boys, how we doing this month? How we doing?
Good, man. Good.
I think we're doing well. I don't know. Maybe the stock market says otherwise, but I think we're going to be good today no matter what.
That's right. That's right. We are recording on August 5th for the July Cloud News of the Month. And so we're going to kind of look back at a month. And obviously right now there's some things going on in the world. So before we get into that, I'm excited to tell you guys a story because I think we've finally reached a pinnacle. This actually might be the last show we ever have to do. I was at a social event. I was, at a thing, and I was talking to a guy at dinner. And usually people ask me what I do, and I'm like, oh, I do computers or internet or something like that. And the guy said, it's a big dude, just a country dude, and he runs a fencing company, right? So, farm fencing and, commercial fencing and residential fencing. And I tell him, yeah, I do technology. And he goes, I'm a technology company that does fencing. So we finally reached that point where every company is a software company. We've reached it. There are no more companies that are no longer. So I think we're done. I think, after
someone call Mark Andreessen and be like, it's finished. Software has finished eating the world. That was right. The fencing company was the last one. And now they're in.
Yeah, he was explaining stuff to me, and I was like, "Man, there's real stuff going on here. This isn't like even legacy comp kind of stuff. It's like new modern stuff." So, so before we jump into, I'll give you guys two choices. We can either talk about the fact that we've reached August. College football starts this month. We can spend 2 or 3 minutes on the good, or we can spend, an hour or so on all the things going on in the tech world that seem to have all gone sideways or backwards. So any early takes on college football starting this month? How excited are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, I'm always a 10. And, and more importantly, I saw one of the first articles, I think, Brian, you even posted it in the Slack, Michigan's being investigated. The investigations have started. There's the wrongdoing from last year is going to carry over. And I'm like, football's back, baby. We got investigations. We got text messages being deleted. I was like, I saw that today. I was like, gosh, it's great. It's like, I think we're 22 days or 21 days out. It's perfect. So I'm really looking forward to it as always.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, and I'll just say I'm a 10 as well, but I'm a 10 because this is the first year. So I've been going to games at all the various universities for years, but this is the first year I am a season ticket holder. So for ECU, for my youngest, I actually got ECU season tickets. And oh, by the way, the entire season tickets for ECU is cheaper than one game at Alabama. So there you go.
Go Pirates.
That's right. You have enough money now to be one of those giant boosters that can have a stadium named after you or something. Well, for all of that good news, it seemed like all things went bad in July, both on the cloud front of things, on the AI side of things, security things. Who wants to start with, the article, the event or whatever that jumped out at you the most as, what was endemic of what happened in July for the world of technology?
Well, I'll jump in and say, I think CrowdStrike was the most memorable one because, of course, I don't know, tens of thousands of people were stranded at airports and there were so many ripple effects of that outage. And, I think a couple things I think the lasting effect of it that I'm very curious about is the fact that Delta Airlines here in the United States has decided to sue CrowdStrike, and they've hired, pretty big guns. I think it's David Boyce from fame of like suing Microsoft and things like that. And the reason I think this going forward is because part of us can say that it's just another outage, another month will go by and we'll all forget about it. Nothing will happen. But if for some reason that team, Delta, is able to, if you will, penetrate the ELA, because usually most of these contractors are pretty well understood. Like you can only get so much money back, right? And it's usually something like what you paid, or it's fairly constrained. Right. So if somehow that gets penetrated, right, that if they say, I don't know, the jury or the judge says, yeah, this outage was so big or your mistake was so big that they can actually get more damages from CrowdStrike than would contractually be obligated. That could have a real fundamental shift, I think, for all of IT in general and security companies in general, right? Suddenly it's like you can't just apologize, send out an Uber Eats coupon and go on with your life. You've got to actually deal with real business problems. So I'm really curious to see if that sustains. That's the thing I think I will take away from this July.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I mean, because, anytime anybody brings up lawsuits, you get into discovery, and you do wonder if like the Delta IT team is like, I don't know if we want all of our dirty laundry aired about, how we do stuff or how well prepared we are or not well prepared. But I mean, it was a big outage. I mean, it was they're claiming $500 million of lost revenue, or having to rebook flights or whatever that is. So it was a big. Well, my favorite comment, I think, though, was Aaron made a comment on the Software Defined Talk Slack, basically saying like, I know I'm old man in the cloud, but like who is pushing into production with just bug fixes that you haven't tested? So to me, that's the other side of it from a technology perspective. Is we're still doing that, and we're still doing it with very, very brittle code bases.
Well, I think the other follow on here is I think you're exactly right around discovery could hurt both sides, because I don't think CrowdStrike wants to, like, if someone's written an email like, hey, we shouldn't just test this out, or we shouldn't roll it out to everyone. We should do like 1%, 5%, 10%. That would be damning. But then today, I thought Delta going into this was like, I think they're going to have a strong case, but their CEO came out today was just like, Windows doesn't have this problems. We should just be using Macs. And I'm like, not sure you understand what you're doing. Like, you don't, the Mac's not really doing, like, if you had said Linux or something, maybe, but I was like, I don't think you know that much about computers. I was like, so maybe discovery would be bad on his side. I was like, I don't think you know what you're talking about. So it could go bad for everyone there.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll add this though, too, along with those comments, it'll be interesting to see what CrowdStrike does going forward, because like I was saying with that comment, there was a whole thread about it. It actually was really interesting about like, okay, with companies like this, to prevent 0 days and some of these other things, CrowdStrike actually today doesn't allow you to do what I would consider a phased rollout, right? Like it's a kind of all or nothing, like push the button and go. And the whole idea of like, hey, do it into this and then, do a staged rollout and do this and do that. CrowdStrike just never wrote that into their code, I guess, is basically what I got from some of the folks that had hands-on experience with it in Software Defined Slack, like users telling me about this and kind of educating me on this. And so it just wasn't even an option, right? So like Delta didn't have that option, and will CrowdStrike now react to that and do phased rollouts or give the option for phased rollouts going forward? Yeah. We'll see.
We'll see. The interesting comment I think I saw was somebody saying, look, it all sounds great and that would be a great best practice, but there are certain regulatory things that are like, you have a minimum amount of time if it's deemed like a P1 security patch to get this thing patched. So you just put it out there. So it'll be interesting. So if I go through the sort of, things that are cloud related that maybe didn't go great in July, you've got Intel cutting 15,000 jobs, suspending the dividend. Sort of the Pat Gelsinger halo is now probably off for sure. AWS is now killing off services under this new CEO. Software multiples are declining. AT&T had all of their, customer records stolen. What next? What didn't go? What did not go well this last month? It's amazing. All this, you think of July as sort of the slow news month because everyone's on vacation, but boy, what happened?
Yeah, no, I think the Amazon one was sort of, I don't necessarily think that's necessarily bad news. It's probably like long overdue. That one around, like, I don't know how many services they're up to, like 130, 150. So, and I do think this is part of kind of this makeover, right? I think the whole idea of, Amazon itself, I think we talked about this last time, was sort of like, hey, let's cut costs. Let's show that we're, kind of got this ship righted. And I think doing that on AWS is all going to be part of the narrative going forward for Wall Street as well. It's like, hey, we're getting rid of services that aren't relevant. The new CEO is in there. He's cleaning stuff up. And then, of course, I think they're going to have some huge launch of some AI features, which I don't know. We'll talk about that in a minute. Maybe that'll be a backfire on them, but I think that'll be all setting up for AWS reInvent. So I don't know. I've always thought, like, the fact that AWS was like, we're never going to deprecate anything. It's like, yeah, I don't know if that's really good news for anyone. So I think that news I didn't take as much as negative, as more as like Amazon's maturing a little bit.
Yeah, no, and I think the sort of, mantra or the halo on AWS, more or less went away a long time ago when it was like, oh, we will always keep cutting prices. Things will always keep getting cheaper. And they haven't mentioned that in 5 or 6 years in any keynote.
Yeah,
that always used to be the, hey, we've cut prices 76 times or 35, whatever it was. That hasn't been mentioned in forever. So, to say, hey, we're not going to do this. they've reached a stage where, they're acting like every other technology company. Granted, they do it at different scale and so forth, but it's like, yeah, we deprecate products. We stop, our initial hook is sort of, everybody's been replicating it, so it goes away. And yeah, it's a perfect timing for this new guy to basically be like, look, it falls under our corporate kind of accountability mantra. Andy wants us to be lean and mean. So, we got rid of the stuff that you guys weren't using. And oh, by the way, we know what you're using and you weren't using that. So fine, no big deal. Here's the one I'm really curious about. So Pat Gelsinger at Intel, first year he's there, he got something like $140 million that very first year, right? Because it was all tied to the CHIPS Act. And now they've been, missing numbers, missing dates, missing deadlines. How much longer does Intel, what does Intel do at this point? Because they basically brought home, their golden boy to fix this problem. I think everybody who covers chips, and I know, Brandon, you love chips, Cote hates chips, but everybody was like, this is a 10-year problem to fix. You're kind of claiming you're going to fix it in a year or two. The government gave you tons and tons of money to go do it. And now they're essentially, I feel like maybe they're like, okay, we are now allowed the economy, or the, kind of the vibe around tech is like accountability is fine and it's cool. So he's like, all right, I'm going to finally drop the hammer that I probably knew about 4 years ago when he first started. I don't know if there's something else there, but it does feel like it's finally like, okay, I can say things are as bad as I knew they were when I first took this job.
I think that's probably true, but I just wonder, if you listen to him kind of outline his strategies, one, extremely good talker, right? Very fast, clearly knows the business. But having said that, he will lay out one of the most complicated corporate strategies you've ever heard. And he'll do it in such a way that, he's just like, it's all going to work. We're going to be an outsourced fab like TSMC. We're going to build great server chips. We're going to build low powered chips. We may help out, and it just goes on and on and on. And it's just sort of like, when you listen to the whole thing, it's like, I doubt you're going to do all of this. Like, I think it would be almost impossible. So I would just say, like, me walking in, and obviously he's got the $100 million, so he can go do whatever he wants for the rest of his life many times over. But it's sort of like, you kind of have to pick. Like, I just don't think you're going to be the foundry that competes with TSMC, the low powered, ARM kind of revolution that keeps happening, and make the Intel chips, right? And do all of this together simultaneously, just because of all the various corporate conflicts. It's sort of like, what does Intel want to do in the next, say, 10 years, to your point? So I think, he speaks well. I can see why he does so well in front of a board of directors. But like, when you're probably there at Intel, I'm sure about 15,000 people getting laid off are like, yeah, well, we were all trying to do like 100 different things, and really nothing's working. And, there's just nothing but chaos inside. So I'm sure there's probably some bitter feelings as some of those employees walk out the door.
Yeah. And I would add too, that at the end of the day too, like you were saying, like, hey, they're trying to do way too many things. And oh, by the way, the one thing at least Wall Street really wants them to do is go create some AI chips anyway. And, they're a distant third in that market behind NVIDIA and AMD. And their plan to catch up still isn't awesome. I don't think. Right.
Well, I think the problem is, and again, not by any means a guru on the chip space or the fab space or whatever, but like, every time somebody who knows that space well, and like, Ben Thompson does a good job covering it, and he brings on people smarter than him to cover it. And they all basically just say the same thing, which is like, look, the chip space is basically math, not the math of building chips, but the math of like how much volume you need, how much a fab costs, how much, how long you could depreciate it for. And they're like, Pat does a great job of explaining all this stuff, right? Like Brandon said, he explains, the 20 slides that he goes through, or the roadmap or whatever, but they're like, none of his math works. Like, none of the timelines match up with what he's sort of claiming to do. He's essentially sort of, breaking physics and breaking economics at the same time. And I think it's just sort of caught up to him. And, it'll be interesting to see. Yeah. Did they become number 3, number 4, number 5? But it's an interesting position in the bigger picture of things, because Intel was supposed to be sort of the flag bearer for, U.S. manufacturing, U.S. chips, all this stuff that has pretty big global implications, and them essentially falling down now, does bring up some interesting, long-term U.S. security, all sorts of, European security kind of issues. So that's one to sort of keep an eye on.
Well, we should just throw out here now, for some brave person out there that wants to short NVIDIA and go long Intel, that would be the YOLO trade of your life. Like maybe it's all going to work out. NVIDIA's like way too far ahead in GPUs, and that's going to fade, and Intel's going to turn it around in the next 5 years. So if you're the person that does it, make sure you take a screenshot of what you buy, and, you can write a book. When it's all said and done, you'll be massively rich if it works out.
Yeah, this is not a financial advice show. Please do not take any advice on financial stuff for us. Do not go bankrupt shorting stocks. Brandon runs his own podcast. You can go after him for that kind of stuff. Absolutely.
Bring it on. Yeah, no, don't do that, but go ahead.
Was there anything in the earnings between Microsoft's earnings up 31%, Google's earnings up 29%? This is just in terms of cloud stuff. Amazon up 19%. Anything there that jumped out at you guys? Or I know there was some concern about, the AI stuff still isn't necessarily making money, where I think we're starting to get the whispers of like, maybe this AI stuff is a little overblown. Anything you heard in those earnings or the numbers around it that made you, raise your eyebrows any more than we, normally go, oh, the numbers went up a little bit from the last quarter?
No, I think you nailed it with the AI stuff. I mean, the biggest thing I'm really starting to see with all of these is, you're starting to see some trough of disillusionment, with the AI stuff and the Gen AI stuff in general, and that's kind of been sprinkled throughout the news. But I think the fact that, the street is starting to look for that in the earnings and the return on investment on the Gen AI stuff, I personally think it's a little early still for all of that, but it is interesting to me that is starting to creep in.
Yeah, they've definitely built it into their model, so they're now sort of backing away from it a little bit. Any other stuff on the cloud side of things, developer experiences, DevOps stuff that caught your guys' eye this last month? It was a lot of sort of folks feeling a little blasé and a little, kind of down in the dumps. But anything else jump out at you in terms of cloud related stuff this month?
I mean, DevOps is dead again.
Yeah, I don't think that literally that horse has been beaten to death many times. But the one thing I did, another one, I just put a marker to like check back in a few years to see what happens. I did think Wiz, the security company, walking away from the $23 billion that Google offered them, I think was a pretty bold move. That's a bunch of people that truly believe in their technology. So we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously security, as we were just talking about with CrowdStrike, very important. Maybe the Wiz will go on to be worth, hundreds of billions, and they're geniuses. Maybe it will never be worth $23 billion again. So that'll be fun to see what comes of that going forward.
Yeah. Can you remember? So other than Facebook turning down Microsoft for whatever they did early in the days, right, as sort of the Bill Gates trying to buy up, can you think of a tech company that got a really big valuation that walked away from it that succeeded through that? Sort of, I bet on myself. I'm trying to think of the last one in the IT space that did that. Right? Obviously Docker, Mesosphere, others are, kind of poster childs for, oops, maybe I should have taken the money, but I can't think of another one, at least that was well publicized, that walked away from it.
I think you go back enough in time. I think Google had some offers right early on,
maybe.
But it's like more that version of Google was more consumer. Now obviously it's gone on to be many other things. So that's probably a good one. And then, of course, the flip side is always interesting to look at. Mostly consumer, but obviously YouTube sold for like $1 billion.
Yeah, Instagram.
Which in retrospect, YouTube's probably worth like several $100 billion. And same thing with Instagram. They sold for like $1 billion, and they're probably worth several. And of course, like it's unfair to say, it's like, who knows? Like as independent entities, would they still have gone on to that massive success? Maybe, maybe not. But they certainly are like big acquisitions that worked out. So there's a few on both sides. I don't know. I just think it just takes a lot of personal confidence to be like, nope, 23 billion is just not good enough. I'm gonna keep going. So I don't know. I mean, but I don't know the products that well either. So I don't even have necessarily a real take on that. I would just say security, sure, very important, and it keeps growing. But there certainly aren't that many security companies that get that big, right? So, but maybe they're the one.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be part of our new documentary series of, things behind the scenes. I think last month we talked about the documentary of Dell's HR thing. I think this one should be just following whiz people around going to their spouse and being like, yeah, that money, yeah, not going to happen. We're not having the same Christmas. We're not having the same vacation we were planning. Because everybody has got one of those spreadsheets that's like, this is what my equity is. This is what it's worth at this point. And they plug $23 billion into that one cell in the spreadsheet, and they were like, ooh, that means this, that, and the other. And now it does not. So yeah, I want to have the Real Housewives or Real Spouses of Wiz. It would be a good documentary, I think.
Indeed.
All right. What, Aaron, what's been going on in the AI world? Lots of, we've got some people sort of merging. We've got some government stuff going on. We've got, NVIDIA, maybe the shine's coming off NVIDIA a little bit. Where do you want to start?
Yeah. So it'll be really interesting because, at the end of the day, we've talked about it before on the show a couple times now. Models keep coming out. Some of them are open source. Some of them are pseudo open source. Some of them are not. And like, I don't know, like we've talked about on the show before, it's like, do we care with the models, right? Like once we've got GPT-4 class models, like I do understand why people are like, okay, either the shine's coming off of it or it's getting a little boring or don't know how we're going to get profit out of this. And so I think the biggest thing from the last month is just all of the news in general is just kind of blah. When it comes to AI,
I don't know if it's blah so much as just like reality setting in.
Yeah, completely. Completely. Absolutely.
I did see an interesting video. I'll have to see if I can find the link to it. I'll post it in there. It was somebody who was doing an interview with Sam Altman, podcasts like this, whatever, getting big guests. And he said, there's sort of two paths you can think of with AI and with models. One, you can assume like the models will only get so much better and people will start like building stuff on top of it. I assume he means like application-y sort of stuff, like, voice interaction or whatever it is. He said, or you can bet that like the path they've made over the last couple of years in terms of sort of advancements, let's call it GPT-2, 2 to 3 to 4 and 5 eventually, will just happen like for infinity. And he's like, and I think 95% of the people should just bet on that second path. And it was another one of those moments where you go, when has that ever happened in technology? Like again, the path that you started on up and to the right and that curve, it just never happens infinitely. But that's the way people are talking, right? You've got people like Jensen saying like, if you're 3 months behind, you're losing. You've got Sam saying, the pace of models are going to increase, infinitely at the same pace. Again, I guess that means like they will be hundreds of billions of dollars to train within the next 4 or 5. I don't know what all that stuff sort of means, but I think we're facing sort of the reality of like, okay, well, what does this really mean? And then you've still got the Sams and the Jensens in the world going like, no, hold on, keep thinking this is bigger than the rest of the world, combined. It does feel like we're in that space.
I think what we're really approaching is the end of the 1.0 or first generation of all of these things. Like you're starting to see, there's I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but there is another model architecture now beyond Transformer, the next generation that has a moving context window and, is going to be much more efficient. And you're starting to see the chips and different kinds of chips that are much more power efficient and smaller models that are just as, I won't say efficient, but give us the same answers or good enough answers in, a much smaller amount of parameters. And so what you're going to start to see is I think this is the start of the second generation of all of this. And just like anything else, you're going to start to see improvements in all the architectures and everything going forward. And I think in both NVIDIA and OpenAI's case, of course, they're betting on everything. You just throw more money at things and it keeps getting better and better and better. But I think actually it's going to be different architectures going forward.
Brandon, you've been following this trend of VC-backed AI companies are all just acqui-hiring. Do you see much room for VCs a year from now in terms of investing, or do these folks all just go, I'm going back to the mothership, I'm going back to OpenAI, I'm going back to Google, I'm going back to Meta? Like, do you think they try and make a thing of it, with their own companies, or do they just start realizing like, I can't keep raising billions of dollars to train models, i.e. Anthropic or, anybody like that?
Yeah, no, I think both the venture capitalists and the founders are probably equally tired on both sides. I think every one of them now, there's a good article The Verge did around every one of, I guess, the major cloud providers has done one of these, like, we're going to hire all the people and leave like this zombie startup, like in some weird form. So that obviously makes the venture capitalists very unhappy because they've essentially lost the people and the money. And then, of course, I think the question going forward will just be, and maybe this gets into some of the stuff with politics, but like, is at some point, is someone going to look at this and be like, no, you can't do this. This is some type of like anti-competitive, situation. Cause it seems like that's why they're doing it. Instead of buying the companies,
right.
They want just the people, but they don't want to get any type of antitrust thing. So I think that's going to be really interesting to look at going forward. But just as an industry though, I always just come back to, it's like, everyone's just in search for like, what can I do with this new AI technology that's going to create some $1 trillion business? And it's a hard question. If anyone knew that, they would do it. Right. And I think we saw Search GPT from ChatGPT. That's going to be their next attempt to maybe monetize it. Like none of us even think, has anyone done anything with the GPT app store? That seems like that is kind of just dead. Like I don't hear about that anymore. So until such time that there is like something that is like, wow, like here's the way to make a lot of new money. And to your earlier question, Brian, about, and that money actually showing up in cloud earnings in some way, right? So It isn't just NVIDIA getting rich. Until something like that happens, I think there's just going to be more and more questions going forward. And I think, the best example, I guess, that we could say at the moment, even this I question, but I know Meta, Facebook has said, well, they use it a lot to improve their advertising and they seem to have better earnings and they seem to, and that's like, that is good. That's good for them, but that's not sort of like, like a new thing that everyone can do. So I think, probably for the next year or two, and venture capitalists will probably start to shift and say, okay, assume you have foundation models, kind of like Aaron was saying, they're all available. What are you going to do with this thing that could never be done before? That's going to create some defensible business that's going to lead to like extraordinary profit. And that's what everyone's looking for. And, who knows if that actually exists, but the search continues.
Yeah, it does. It does feel a little bit like in the short term, it was like, okay, the companies who have these, massive cash war chests, right? The big 5, 6, 7 companies, we're going out buying all these GPUs. And then if you, like you said, if you look at, well, what would their backup plan be if the business model didn't work out? So for Google and Facebook, obviously they're the kings of advertising. It's already been doing advertising for them. So you're like, okay, you can depreciate and monetize those in other ways. You can keep doing what you do. Apple, on the other hand, is like, okay, if I can build a small model, which they seem to be sort of doing, like, okay, that gives people a reason to buy new phones, which is just, again, an extension of their business. And then you get into like Microsoft and Amazon. And Amazon, they've got an advertising business that continues to grow, so they probably can do some stuff there, but it doesn't seem like they've necessarily cracked the nut in terms of making it a really profitable extension to AWS, which is sort of their cash cow. And even Microsoft in the last earnings, Satya Nadella was saying, well, he's all bullish on GitHub Copilot because it now is, making more revenue than GitHub when they first bought it. But it's like, well, yeah, but when you first bought it, they were making $100 million in revenue, right? So it's sort of it's like comparing, being like, well, I'm way faster than the 3-year-old who lives down the street from me. And it's like, well, yeah, you should be. You're an adult and you can, you've got longer legs or whatever it is, right? It's sort of an absurd comparison. So yeah, I think we're going to start seeing just some people with some real basic being like, okay, AI, at least as best we can tell, is the most expensive technology we've ever seen before. It's not surprising that you guys haven't figured out a business model that immediately matches up to the pace at which you were buying. And then, we'll sort of, go through whatever, depreciation and other things that we've gone through. But it feels like it's sort of a rationalization that doesn't seem that out of the ordinary, but it does feel like there are still, people holding on hope to being like, no, it's still going to like completely change the world. And you're like, well, maybe it will, but maybe it won't be as fast as, it won't be in 2025. It'll be in 2035 or 2030 or something along, different timeline.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the thing, and I'd like to get Aaron's take, and you're probably closer to it, is like, I think the canary in the coal mine, if you will be Anthropic and OpenAI, because they're sort of, they're startups that are highly valued, that do have a strong presence, but they don't have the fortress of cash. Cause it's like, I don't know, the numbers are so big. Like for Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, it's like, sure, maybe they're disappointed they spent the money, but it doesn't really, affect them going forward. Whereas, if at some point, if OpenAI and Anthropic was just like, no, we're not going to give you another $10 billion on like a $200 billion valuation, those companies start to end, or those people, to your earlier point, those researchers decide like, it's a good job just going to Google and getting a huge paycheck. So I don't know, Aaron, I don't know if you agree with that, but like, are there other, if you will, maybe Perplexity, another one, are there other sort of like all in pure plays that we should be watching to see if they actually can do it?
I was actually going to mention Perplexity. Perplexity is probably the one out of all the ones I've tried. I actually use Perplexity like multiple times a day. I've 100% replaced, my searching with Perplexity these days. And so like, it is the only one for me that is like, would justify, like I use it all the time. It actually changes the way I do things kind of thing. But that doesn't mean they have a good business model. Like it feels like they're the Docker of AI. Like there's a bunch of people using it, but no one really paying for Perplexity, right? So I feel like Perplexity is going to be the first one that can be the canary in the coal mine, but I do think Anthropic and OpenAI, but I think Anthropic first because they probably just aren't going to have the pockets, even though that all of them have taken so much money at this point. Now, I will say this though, I think it's super interesting too because like Microsoft came out recently and has now officially, although we've seen it coming for a while, that Microsoft now officially, thinks OpenAI is a competitor, even though they've given them, $10+ billion. Now they're a competitor. Yeah. And so, you're starting to see a lot of bets placed, a lot of regrets. A lot of changing of horses.
It feels like Anthropic's the one who's like, we're just being nice guys. We're just kind of plugging along, and we're friendly with Amazon. So that feels like the safe haven for them. Perplexity, Google is probably watching Perplexity, seeing how good they get. That eventually probably gets spun into Google just because it's search and it makes sense. And I mean, unless it gets spun into Facebook or something like like. Search is going to go with ads. That's, going to kind of, the two of those are going to kind of go together because they can't scale at, revenue, whatever they're going to do. OpenAI feels like the one that's like, they've been maniac. Like, I mean, OpenAI feels like it's like, do you have a plan for how to deal with Sam? And if you don't, then let them go. I mean, honestly, like, they're kind of over their skis. Their demos are cool, but nobody ever gets to use their demos, gets to use the technology, and he's just sort of out there. And, he's dependent on Microsoft a lot. And like you said, Aaron, it doesn't feel like Microsoft necessarily wants to be their only lifeline. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
OpenAI feels to me like either the Uber or the WeWork of the AI space, the company with a whole bunch of money and that crazy co-founder who's willing to do anything. That's just what they feel like to me.
Yeah. We're bumping up against about 30 minutes. We usually go about 40 or so on this show. I want to throw out a couple of questions to you guys, just general opinions and feedbacks and stuff. So a lot of the show we've talked about today, and even if you're watching the news, on August 5th, we haven't even talked about the fact that like here in the States, the political machines are up and running. I mean, we literally almost had a candidate assassinated. We've had a switch in at the top of one of the major parties. There's a lot of sort of uncertainty that goes along with politics as well as technology and so forth. What do you guys tend to do when the world feels like it's a little bit crazy? Like what advice do you give to the folks on the teams you manage? What do you think about yourself? Like, how do you find a balance between work and life and not reading the news all the time or not having to, hear from it from, friends and family and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's maybe watch the Olympics. That's what you should do right now. But what I do, or what I did this morning, I actually really like this author, podcaster, Morgan Housel. So I'll put a link in in the show notes, or maybe Brian will put a link in the show notes for everybody. But he has several books, and they're kind of about finance, but they're not really about finance. They're more about philosophy. But he had this, and he kind of recycles his content and kind of even tells you he does it between the books, the podcast, and blog posts. But like, I actually went out, I always like just like ride my bike in the morning and stuff, get out, if you want to get outside, that's always a way to clear your head. But he had this one called Justifying Optimism, which I think is good. It was just a good way to like think about, and he kind of takes things from a very long-term approach, which is kind of boring, right? It's sort of like today everyone's talking about, like some complicated trade in Japan, the yen, whatever. And it's like, and his kind of take would be something like, probably in the next 10 years, if you put money in an index fund, it's very likely it'll be up 7% annually. Right. And it's sort of like, that's, it's not saying that will happen, but it's very likely to be doing that. And he sort of like puts things in a lot of perspective. So I find just finding that kind of stuff to be a good reminder that like everything, lots of things have happened before, and generally things work out even in the short term if there's some pain. So that's what I do. I don't know, Aaron, what do you do? You probably run a marathon or something.
No, actually I'm on a break from that right now, but I was actually going to say along the lines of like, hey, I turtle a little bit, but I found, go read a George R.R. Martin book. Just pick one of them. But what I'm reading right now is the one the House of Dragons is based on. I forget the name of the book. Is it Fire and Blood?
Fire and Ice, I think, right?
Fire and Ice, yeah. Excuse me. But 800 pages that reads like a textbook. It's boring as hell, but it's super interesting all at the same time. It is amazing what that dude can come up with. I'm constantly amazed at the worlds he builds, but that's my way of kind of dealing with all of that. And yeah, I will listen to a lot of audiobooks these days. I listen to way too many audiobooks and podcasts, I feel like.
Yeah. No, it's good. I like that. Yeah. Find something that takes your mind away from it. Find something with a little bit of depth so that you don't give up on it in a day. And find somebody that gives you something positive. I like that. So last question for you guys. Similar type of stuff. So it feels like it's been a pretty busy year so far. March, April, May was a ton of announcements. There was a lot going on. Obviously, there's some things on the downside going on this last month. Do you feel like, Aaron, you mentioned sort of turtling. Do you feel like sort of leaders, kind of across the board, whether it's business or government, sort of go, look, in times of uncertainty, we just sort of pull back. We do a lot of wait and see. We see what happens, whether it's politics or, global stuff or economy. Do you think the second half of the year sort of, falls into that wait and see mode? Or do you think we're in for a few more months of sort of, choppy waters and so forth? What's your prediction in terms of calmness versus choppy waters for the second half of the year?
I won't call it a prediction, but I will say what I'd be hopeful for is, at least in our industry, I feel like we always, the last couple of years have been a bloodbath with layoffs and whatnot. And like Intel, just happened. And when we record this, Dell actually did another one today. And like, it's, I'm just waiting for those cuts. Like, when are we going to hit rock bottom? Like, we keep saying we are, and I'm hoping that this fall would be rock bottom for those.
Yeah.
Well, I would say I hope as well, but I do think, just a couple things. I do think if any company, and Intel maybe being kind of, I don't know if it was really timed right with this, but I think if any company was on the fence about, reducing cost or wanted, if you will, some kind of cover to do it, I do think, it does seem like the next few months that will definitely be available, right? If you were on the fence and I didn't know if I wanted to do a 10% layoff or 5% layoff, you probably can do it without much penalty, right? And just, kind of be seen as doing the right thing at the right time. So I do think what I'm more interested in, though, is like, is anybody, kind of like counter to all that? Does anyone take the opportunity to invest, right? Is there somebody who's sort of like, because I think we're about to see the real convictions around AI. It's like who was there because it was a trend and who was a real like deep believer, right? Because we've heard many keynotes, and I guess NVIDIA is sort of all in almost by definition. And so it'd be real interesting to see what they do, right? If you really believe, because I know a note just came out that NVIDIA is going to push back their next release of, I think it's called Blackwell, a few months and things like that. And it'll be interesting to see Like, is that cover for them to kind of push it out even more, right? Or do they all in? Do they bringing it in and charging just as hard? So that'll be kind of the thing I'm watching more, sort of like, does anyone, to kind of Aaron's point, does anyone take the opportunity to hire more people, to do something new, to really, push some effort that they really believe in? Or is it just sort of the herd mentality? We all ran to AI. Now we're going to run away from AI. We're going to lay off, right? Because that kind of stuff I think is sort of just boring, right? It's just sort of like doing what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. Well, here, I'll make a prediction though. When the NVIDIA one related with everyone, there was an article about how many millionaires there are at NVIDIA right now. It'll be pretty easy to get a job here in a couple of years because all those millionaires are going to retire. Like there's going to be some huge attrition in the next couple of years just because a lot of those people just don't have to work anymore.
Yeah. Although I'm not sure you can just sort of like, jump over and become a chip designer for GPUs overnight. It's really a skill set that transfers easily. So, all right, boys. Well, let's end on a high note. College football season starts in about 21 days, give or take, 3 weeks from now. So by next month, Cloud News of the Month, we will be able to do some recaps on the first week. We'll sort of know who's pretenders, who are contenders. We've got that to look forward to. Hopefully the heat starts to dissipate a little bit in the places where we live. Although I think we got another month or so of brutal heat. But keep your chin up, folks. These things happen. As Tom, there's an Instagram thing with Tom Hanks that goes around, and they ask all these advice things, and he goes, the best advice I ever got is when things are really bad, they told me, this too shall pass. And when things are really great and you feeling on top of the world, sometimes this too shall pass. So we had a bad month. Some bad things happened, but at the end of the day, if your health is good, your family's good, you're still employed, keep your chin up. It'll get better. This too shall pass. So I'll wrap it up with Cloud News of the Month, boys. Thanks for everything. Any last minute thoughts or kind of things you want to throw in or give people things to think about before we wrap up?
All good here, Brandon.
Just as always, you need another podcast, check out Software Defined Talk, either sign up, listen to the podcast, or get into the Slack, and you can find Aaron and Brian in there as well. You can bother them about technology or football or whatever else you wanted to bother them about.
That's right. Food, crypto, whatever you want to talk about. Yeah. All right, boys. It's been a good month. Thanks for doing it, Brandon. As always, thanks for jumping on. You're well past the 5 Timers Club. We're gonna have to get you a jacket for this now. And folks, with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks y'all for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.